The girl had learned early that silence could be a kind of shield. She sat on the cold concrete step at the edge of the underground parking garage, her back pressed against a pillar marked with peeling yellow paint. Around her, engines hummed and echoed, footsteps came and went, and the smell of oil mixed with damp air. No one paid attention to her. Adults rarely did. To them, she was just another child waiting for someone who might never come. She twisted a broken bracelet around her wrist, pretending to be absorbed in it, but her ears were sharp. Listening had become second nature to her, almost instinctive. Her name was Lucia, and her mother, before she vanished from her life like a door quietly closing, had taught her something precious. She had taught her Chinese. Not the polite phrases tourists learned, but the everyday language people used when they thought no one else could understand. Two guards stood a short distance away, leaning casually near a sleek black luxury car. The vehicle gleamed under the fluorescent lights, flawless, expensive, untouchable, much like its owner. The guards looked ordinary enough. Dark uniforms, earpieces, professional posture. Men people trusted without thinking. They spoke softly, but the garage carried sound in strange ways. Their words drifted to Lucia clearly, sliding into her ears as naturally as her own thoughts. "Make sure the gate closes the moment he gets inside," one said in Mandarin, his tone relaxed. "It's already set," the other replied. "Once the engine starts, there's no stopping it. It'll look clean. An accident." Lucia's fingers tightened around the bracelet. For a moment, she wondered if she had misunderstood. Adults often talked about things children didn't fully grasp. But there was no confusion in their voices, no metaphor, no joke. The words were sharp and final. Engine. Device. No stopping it. Her heart began to beat faster, loud enough that she was sure someone could hear it. She lifted her eyes slowly, carefully, and saw the man they were talking about walking toward the car. Alejandro Vega. She didn't know much about him, only what people whispered. Millionaire, powerful, dangerous to cross. His suit was perfectly tailored, his phone pressed to his ear, his attention elsewhere. He looked untouchable, like someone fate itself wouldn't dare interrupt. Lucia swallowed. Fear pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. She thought about staying quiet. About how easy it would be to stay seated, to let things unfold the way they always did in the world of adults. She thought about her mother's voice, calm and steady, telling her, "If you understand something important, you don't pretend you don't." The guards laughed softly at something, their confidence absolute. Lucia stood up. Her legs felt weak, almost unreal, as if they didn't fully belong to her. Each step toward the man felt like walking into deep water. The guards didn't notice her at first. No one ever noticed children until they became a problem. She opened her mouth, and for a split second, no sound came out. Then fear turned into urgency. "Don't get in the car," she shouted. The words echoed through the garage, sharp and out of place. Alejandro stopped mid-step. The guards stiffened. Lucia's chest burned as she drew in another breath, knowing there was no going back now. Alejandro turned slowly, irritation already forming on his face, but it faltered when he saw who had spoken. A thin girl stood a few meters away, her dark hair unevenly tied back, her shoes worn at the edges. She looked terrified, but she did not move. For a moment, the entire garage seemed to pause, suspended between noise and silence. One of the guards stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Hey, kid, this isn't your place. Move along." Lucia ignored him. She ran forward and grabbed the sleeve of Alejandro's coat with surprising strength. "Please," she said, her voice shaking now that she was closer. "They're lying to you. They were talking about the car. There's something inside it. Don't get in." Alejandro looked down at her hand, then at her face. He was used to fear, but usually it was fear directed at him, not fear offered to him like a warning. "What are you talking about?" he asked quietly. "They were speaking Chinese," Lucia said quickly. "They said once you start the engine, it's over." The guard nearest them laughed sharply. "Sir, she's making things up. Probably trying to scare you." Alejandro's eyes flicked to the man, then back to Lucia. Something in her expression unsettled him. It wasn't desperation or hope. It was certainty. In fluent Mandarin, Alejandro said, "What did you say about the engine?" The question fell like a stone. Both guards froze. One of them recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Sir, I don't." Alejandro cut him off, repeating the exact words Lucia had heard, word for word, tone for tone. The smile vanished. The man's hand moved slightly toward his weapon. Everything happened at once. Alejandro pulled Lucia behind him as a gunshot cracked through the garage. His real security team, positioned farther back, reacted instantly. Shouts echoed. Someone screamed for cover. Tires squealed as another vehicle tried to escape. The trader guard closest to the car bolted, sprinting toward the driver's door. Lucia felt Alejandro's hand tighten around her shoulder as he pushed her behind a concrete pillar. Her ears rang from the noise, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "Stop him!" someone shouted. The guard reached the car and slammed his hand down on a hidden control. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. His face twisted in confusion, then fear. The explosion was sudden and brutal. Metal shrieked. Heat washed through the air. The blast hurled Alejandro and Lucia backward, slamming them into the ground. Lucia's head struck the concrete, stars bursting behind her eyes. She tasted blood and dust and something bitter she couldn't name. When the noise faded, there was only ringing silence, broken by coughing and distant sirens. Smoke curled upward, thick and choking. The car was no longer whole, just a twisted, burning shell. Lucia forced her eyes open. The world tilted, but she was alive. She turned her head slowly. Alejandro lay nearby, stunned but breathing. A wave of relief swept through her, so strong it made her chest ache. Later, much later, she found herself wrapped in a blanket, sitting on a hospital bed far too clean and white. Doctors spoke softly nearby. Machines beeped steadily. Her headache throbbed, but it was bearable. Alejandro stood at the window, his suit replaced by simple clothes, his face drawn and tired. He looked different now, as if something heavy had been lifted and replaced with something heavier still. He turned when he sensed her watching. "You saved my life," he said. Lucia shrugged weakly. "I just listened." He sat down across from her. Most people hear words. Very few understand them. She thought of her mother then, of the evenings spent whispering stories in another language, of lessons she hadn't known would matter. "She told me languages are doors," Lucia said. "If you can open them, you see what others don't." Alejandro nodded slowly. Outside the window, the city continued as if nothing had happened. But inside him, something had shifted. He knew that kind of warning did not come twice. When Lucia was discharged, she didn't return to the shadows she'd come from. Alejandro made sure of that. He arranged schooling, safety, and a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. Not as charity, but as responsibility. Years later, when Lucia stood confidently before rooms full of people, translating words that carried weight and consequence, she remembered the underground garage and the moment she chose to speak. She remembered that sometimes fate whispered in foreign languages, and survival depended on who was willing to listen. Lucia stayed in the hospital for 3 days. The doctors said she was lucky, that the concussion could have been much worse, that children were more resilient than people believed. She listened politely, nodding when expected, but her mind drifted often. At night, when the lights dimmed and the hallway quieted, the sound of the explosion returned to her in fragments. The crack of metal, the rush of heat, the moment when the world seemed to break apart and then stitch itself back together again. Alejandro visited every day. He never came with a crowd, never with cameras or loud voices. Sometimes he brought fruit, sometimes books, once a small notebook and a pen. He didn't ask many questions. He seemed content to sit in the chair beside her bed, as if his presence itself was a promise. On the second day, he asked, "Where is your family?" Lucia hesitated. "My father left a long time ago. My mother, she's gone." Alejandro didn't press her. He had learned, in his own life, that absence could be more complicated than death. "If you want," he said carefully, "you don't have to go back to where you were." She looked at him then, really looked. Power clung to him in ways that money alone couldn't explain, but there was something else now too, something quieter, like a man who had glimpsed the edge of his own ending. "I don't want to disappear," she said. "I just want to be safe." "You will be," Alejandro replied. And for once, it wasn't a business promise. It was personal. When she left the hospital, she didn't return to the streets near the garage or the unstable rooms where she had spent nights pretending not to be alone. She was taken to a small apartment with clean windows and soft light, watched over by people who spoke gently and didn't ask her to earn her place. She struggled at first with the silence. Danger had always announced itself before. Safety felt strange, almost suspicious. She began school within weeks. Sitting in a classroom again felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's life. She was behind in some subjects, ahead in others. Languages came easily. Words fit together in her mind like pieces that had always been waiting. English, Spanish, Mandarin, she moved between them effortlessly, surprising teachers who had already labeled her as fragile. Alejandro followed her progress from a distance, careful not to turn her life into another extension of his empire. He created a foundation quietly, without his name stamped too loudly on it. Its purpose was simple on paper: education, language access, protection for those who spoke truths others wanted buried. In practice, it was his way of repaying a debt he could never fully settle. The investigation into the attempted assassination faded from public memory, smothered by controlled narratives and legal settlements. But Alejandro never forgot how close he had come to dying because he trusted the wrong voices. He changed how he moved through the world. He listened more. He questioned silence. He no longer assumed loyalty wore a uniform. Lucia grew. Years passed. Her childlike sharpness softened into confidence, but the instinct to listen never left her. She learned to read people the way she once read shadows and whispers. At 17, she was already assisting in high-level translation work for the Foundation, sitting quietly in rooms where decisions were made, her presence barely noticed, her impact immense. One evening, after a long meeting, Alejandro found her standing on a balcony overlooking the city. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "That day in the garage." She thought for a long moment. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I hadn't spoken," she said. "But then I remember who you wouldn't be." He smiled faintly. "Alive, yes," she said, "and listening." When Lucia left for university abroad, Alejandro watched her go without interference. He had learned that saving someone didn't mean owning their future. She studied international relations and linguistics, drawn to borders where misunderstanding caused the most damage. She worked harder than anyone, driven not by gratitude but by purpose. Years later, when she returned as a consultant for global negotiations, her name carried weight on its own. People leaned forward when she spoke. Conflicts softened when she translated not just words, but intent. On the anniversary of the explosion, she visited the rebuilt garage once. The space was brighter now, cleaner, unrecognizable. She stood where the car had once been, closed her eyes, and listened. There was nothing dangerous in the air, only the hum of ordinary life. Lucia smiled quietly and walked away, knowing that sometimes survival wasn't about strength or wealth, but about understanding a warning spoken in a language others chose to ignore. Lucia did not speak about the garage often, but it never truly left her. Certain sounds still tightened her chest. The sudden slam of a metal door, the echo of voices in enclosed spaces, the sharp click of an engine turning over. She learned to breathe through those moments, to ground herself in the present. Safety, she discovered, was not the absence of fear but the ability to move forward despite it. At university, she lived simply. She avoided attention, even as professors praised her precision and calm under pressure. Languages unfolded in her mind like maps, revealing routes others could not see. She became known not just for accuracy, but for sensitivity. She caught what was implied, what was deliberately hidden, what trembled beneath polite phrasing. In negotiations, this mattered more than flawless grammar. Alejandro followed her path from afar. They spoke occasionally, brief conversations filled with updates rather than nostalgia. He respected her independence, though part of him still felt the urge to shield her from every sharp edge of the world. He resisted it. He knew too well how protection could become another kind of cage. Years later, Lucia was invited to assist in a delicate international dispute involving private security contracts and state interests. The stakes were high, the room tense with old mistrust. As she translated, she noticed something familiar, a pattern in tone, a casual cruelty masked as efficiency. A phrase repeated too often. A pause that came before truth. She interrupted gently, asking for clarification in the speaker's native language. The room stilled. The man hesitated. The words he finally offered revealed a plan far harsher than what had been officially presented. Murmurs rippled through the delegates. What might have become a quiet approval unraveled into scrutiny. After the session, a senior official pulled Lucia aside. "How did you hear that?" he asked. She answered simply, "Because he thought no one would." That night, alone in her apartment, Lucia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the child she had been, small, invisible, listening from the shadows. She thought of her mother's lessons, of Alejandro's stunned face in the garage, of the thin line between silence and survival. Her life had been shaped not by power, but by attention. She called Alejandro for the first time in months. "I wanted you to know," she said, "what you built is working." He was quiet for a moment. "And you?" he asked. "Are you?" She smiled softly. "Yes, I am." When she ended the call, the city stretched out before her, vast and uncertain. Lucia knew danger would always exist, hidden in confident voices and sealed doors. But she also knew this. As long as someone was willing to listen carefully, to understand deeply, and to speak when it mattered most, silence would never fully win. She closed the window, turned out the light, and rested, ready, as she had always been, to hear what others tried to conceal.